Who would you reach out to for the latest in international education? Who brings years of recruiting expertise to the table? And who assembles school leaders from around the globe to connect and create together? The answer to all of the above is Laura Light, the ultimate connector. Countless international educators know Laura from her work leading recruiting for International School Services, ISS, and now Laura is the Executive Director of the Association for the Advancement of International Education, AAIE, which supports international school leaders through online learning programs, mentoring, and projects. We started the interview with Laura having her share the mission of AAIE. Since the mission involves bringing together international school leaders, it connects seamlessly to our guiding question of what are some current trends in international education? We covered several topics and trends in this interview, including recruiting, especially around how educators in schools connect and the timeline for those connections, strategies for recruiting, vetting schools, what international schools can look like, curriculum, school leadership and management, growing one's network, and leveraging regional associations of schools. Check out the show notes for Laura's full biography. We had so many questions for her that we recorded a second interview to further discuss current issues that international school leaders are talking about. This episode was recorded on September 18th, 2023. We now give you Laura Light.
Hi, Laura. Welcome to Educators Going Global, and thank you so much for being with us today. Where in the world are you right now?
Audrey and David, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I am sitting in upstate New Jersey right now in a small town called Sparta. The office for AAIE is in Princeton, so we are based here in New Jersey. It's funny, I'm not originally from New Jersey, and the irony of how I got here, but my family was originally from here long, long ago, so the circle has been closed in some ways. We'll be coming back. I'm calling in from New Jersey.
Welcome home. This is Sparta, is what came to my head when you said that. So this, for our audience, this is one of a two-part series of interviews with Laura that our listeners will be able to access on our site. So get ready for some great information. Maybe you could start by sharing with us a brief going global story from your experiences living and teaching overseas.
Yeah, thank you. Again, from my comment earlier about me being in New Jersey, I am actually a third culture kid, born and raised overseas, born in France and grew up in Europe, came back to the States, then went back and graduated from high school overseas in Europe from DoD school. So not from an international school. Went back to the States at 17 years old, go to Clemson University in South Carolina, and then managed to land my first job 3 weeks out of college at the American School of Kuwait. So that's how it got me into the international school world, and I have never looked back. Kuwait, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, London, Singapore, the UN school in Manhattan. The best kept secret around is teaching overseas. No question about that. And people always used to ask me, how'd you find out about it? It was by happenstance, but never looked back, and it's been a great ride.
The best kept secret. It makes you sound like the ITP guys. I love it.
Yes. And it's interesting, the best kept secret and how it kind of happens by happenstance, especially for us that are veterans a long time ago. But now, hopefully through our efforts and the ITP guys and a lot of other outlets, more and more people are finding out about international education. And again, we're super excited that you're here because you had an organization that really helps leadership in schools around the world. It's called the Association for the Advancement of International Education, better known as AAIE. So, could you give us a little background on the organization and your efforts with it?
Thank you. It's my honor to be sitting here at AAIE. It's the Association for the Advancement of International Education. It was started over 65 years ago by a man by the name of Ernie Menino, who helped pull it together. The irony of the first event AAIE held was in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So New Jersey keeps coming up in this conversation, doesn't it? But AAIE is here to work with the professional development and support of leaders around the school. Our tagline is to lead into the future with vision, wisdom, courage, and integrity. And our job is to bring the community of leaders together to discuss, help support, and work with their professional development. So we have a long, deep history. It's a not-for-profit. We are promoting exemplary school leadership with research-based, effective, and innovative educational practices. It's quite an entity, and we're doing some great things.
Well, the power of collaboration comes to mind in a couple conversations with you. Your efforts to bring heads of school and other leaders together to share. And that's what a lot of our conversation today is going to be about. What are you learning from chatting with these leaders? So that leads into our guiding question of what are some current trends in international education. So that's the big theme for the show. And let's break it down into some parts. And this kind of gets to some of the past hats that you've worn. So let's start with recruiting. So, where does recruiting stand? How has the recruiting process changed recently? And what are some possible changes on the horizon?
Yeah, those are good questions. I'm going to go back to your first part of your question, David, and that was about coming together to share and work together. And really, that's what AIE does: is brings the leaders in with the thought leaders, and many of the leaders of schools are thought leaders. They're exemplary schools as they're moving forward, and we're all helping each other. And just this past week, I had a conversation with leaders from around the world, the heads of school conversation. Technology was used to bring them along, and you're going to hear that word a lot from me as we go into the recruiting phase. And just a side note here, yes, my background was Director of Global Recruitment with International School Services. But we brought the leaders all together and we asked them in the conversation, what keeps you up at night? And so they all started putting in their thoughts and the main topics of what do they need to work on. These came on our list: recruiting, so right there at the top, enrollment and capacity, security and safety, DEIJ, equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, AI, that's been a big one, student pathways on where the school's going and what are the pathways they have for students, geopolitical issues. We have seen many schools having to deal with that. Board training, working with their boards as an internal concept, and well-being of staff and students. Well-being is a big topic that these leaders are focusing on coming out of COVID.
Well, thanks for that overview. And it's so interesting. Just yesterday, I was emailing with my previous podcast partner, Jeff Udick. He is in Manila right now running a session on generative AI. And he was giving me some feedback on what he's picking up from the participants there. So clearly, that is something that's on the table for schools to look at. And as an old instructional technologist, how to grab hold of and how to make a part of their learning and their curriculum design and not be scared, but figure out how to use it, how to leverage it. So let's jump into recruiting just on how things have changed over the past few years, because obviously we had the jump in virtual recruiting and all that. And I'm wondering what the carryover is from the pandemic and how recruiting changed.
Yeah, interesting that you bring up the online recruiting. When I was with ISS, and shout out to them, they were the first ones to do the online events. We did the online events as well as the in-person events, and that's continuing today. So kudos to them. Everybody is doing those now. But let's be fair, recruiting is changing dramatically for a wide variety of reasons. Number one, how people connect, how people are chatting and coming together. Like you and I are talking right now. This can all be done online. It has been a dramatic change on how schools connect and how they meet with people. So, as we look at recruiting, one of the things that I've found is recruiting is going earlier. I remember way back in the day, I'm old enough, I can say that. Way back in the day, I didn't have to make a decision about whether I wanted to return to a school or not until January or February. Gave us a lot of flexibility. Are you going to come back next year or are you not? Right now, schools are asking in September, October for the commitment for the following year. And that's not the first change that we've seen. The season, the recruiting season, which used to be January, February, March, is now really October, November, December, January, February, March. So it's no longer a time in a year for a leader to focus on recruiting. It is a year-round job, full stop. It is
Mm-hmm.
going on an extensive basis. So that's number one. Number two, people are doing like I said, what we're doing, meeting online, Zoom, and all of these ways of connecting. So finding out about the jobs earlier, then connecting earlier is changing the recruiting events quite dramatically. And yet I don't think the recruiting events are going to go away. I think they might pare down, but I do think that they're always going to, there's that blink instance, and maybe we shouldn't use that word because of people to talk about the biases that come along with that concept, and bias is a strong word in recruiting these days, but that aspect of meeting face to face and who are you and where do you want. But in some ways, I got to be honest with you, so the next part of the recruiting piece that I'll get into is diversity, equity, inclusion, including and ensuring that there is a diverse community within the recruiting pool, and each school is bringing in a diverse team each year so that you have a well-rounded perspective. So that bias thing is something that all leaders need to be very aware of. But diversity, equity, inclusion is another piece of these leaders are doing some great work, still more work to be done, but looking at bringing in diverse teachers and leaders within their schools. So technology is changing it. Diversity, equity, inclusion is changing it. The other aspect too is been a lot of work done in child protection. So as you're going into the recruiting piece, ensuring that you have background checks and ensuring that you have documentation from where you've been is a very important piece. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. What other questions do you have? I could go into each one of those for at least half an hour.
Well, we often use the term continuum, and back to the technology when we talk about a hybrid approach to teaching and learning, part of it blended, part of it virtual, part of it face to face. I'm just wondering, which schools are saying, or I guess which tier schools, if we can generalize, are saying we're going to do a whole lot of virtual work because so many teachers are going to come to us. They're going to contact us directly. We can do a lot of virtual. But then do we close the deal by going to a fair or two? And then when you maybe are dealing with some lower tiered schools, it's a bit more of a struggle to hire people. They're just doing everything possible to bring in people, I'm guessing. So what's your take comparing maybe the top tier and more the lower tier schools in their efforts?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, David. And I would honestly say that I think all schools are going online. They're all jumping into the various databases, using all kinds of technology and going at it earlier. And they're all going online. As for going to the events, we are finding that some of the schools that have a hard time doing the recruiting might be more available at the events, but I'm also hearing from other schools are saying that, I still want that face to face. I still want to sit down with them. So I don't want to discount the events at all. There are some great events. Search Associates is doing some great work. ISS is doing some great work. There's lots of events going on. But as a recruiter and as someone seeking a job, you have to jump into the technology. And I would tell you right now, jump in the technology in September. Do not wait.
Well, on that note, my son is applying. If anyone's looking for a top notch physics teacher who has a master's degree, he is applying. He's in his third year in the US teaching. But I told him, I just remembered because he's going to apply mainly in Asia. said, get ready for these schools. The first thing they're going to say when you contact them or you go to their website is get into their database, whatever database provider they use. So just as you were saying, so many schools are very systematic, especially the ones that have so many applicants. So that's kind of moving us into our next question. Audrey will take us to with tips. Just be ready to have all your paperwork, all your data. And as you're pointing out with the child protection, I'm wondering, is it just worthwhile to go ahead to your, whether it's your local police, if you're in the US, the FBI, and getting that documentation ahead of time that shows that you're ready for the child protection questions that come forth?
Without a doubt, I would say that you definitely want to jump in on all that. Audrey, I'll send it over to you, but I just wanted to back that up. Now it's September. Go that way. Audrey, what's your question? Or back in days?
Well, my question could not have been teed up any more effectively. And my question is, what other kind of tips and strategies do you have for people out there on the recruiting trail?
Okay. So I would say number one, start your work in September, get your file up to date. Make sure that you get everything that's needed to create a well-rounded profile, whatever system that you're using. I'd also have your own personal, maybe website or a page where you could direct people to. Schools are using a wide variety of providers out there. So you're going to have to be ready to jump into different entities. ISS has a system, Search has a system. So make sure you are ready to fill out those applications and get the letters of recommendation that support you. Yes, work on getting the child protection piece in place so that you can ensure that you have that ready to go. One of the other things I always tell people looking for a job is go find the schools that you really want to work with, that are your dream jobs, and highlight them. Because the first place a school goes to is their own website. So the first place they're going to post the job is going to be within their website. Then they're going to go to the various providers. So I always tell people, create a folder and check it each day. And if you see a job, be the first one in there. Now, the other thing I always tell people is apply for all jobs. I know I landed at schools I didn't see coming because I was kind of open-minded. I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And I want all people to consider that. People a lot of times want to go, I want to go to this exemplary school or that exemplary school. And yet you can have an incredible experience at a smaller, maybe not a major city. So I really want people to be very open-minded, apply to other jobs. So much of your job is who you're working for and with. So you need to open those doors to find that perfect school for you. Those big exemplary schools are great places to be, but there are some hidden gems out there. And I'm going to go on a side note here. When I first got into the international school world, there were a couple hundred schools around the world. That shows you how old I am. Right now, there's a group out there called ISC Research, and then their huge database of international schools. I think they're up to 12,000 international schools. So the opportunity is there. And in the recruiting field, as from the leader perspective, going back to what keeps you up at night, the teacher shortage is a true thing. And these leaders are worried about it. They have their eye on that. They realize that the number of teachers in many countries around the world is shrinking for a variety of reasons, which is going to make their job harder.
Yeah, in fact, I think it's kind of interesting how their need to think more broadly in terms of who they're hiring helps to fill that DEIJ piece very nicely. The two work
Well said.
together. So two wrongs making a right, we might say. But thank you for that. I'm sure that people out there listening got some great tips from there. David, over to you.
So reversing, and this is connecting to the idea of it being a teacher's market. What are some tips you have for vetting schools? So you put your list together, you've gone to like our website where we have listings of databases and how to go to different school websites, and you're learning about them. What are some tips on trying to learn about schools and say whether it's going to be a reasonable fit? Maybe there's some red flags. And then on the optimistic side, what are some great things that you can find out about schools?
That's a really good question. So I go back to that ISC research comment about 12,000, 13,000 schools out there. There are many of them you don't want to consider. Let's be fair. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody right now, but you do want to be very careful about where you go. One of the things I would say is definitely look for an accredited school. That means they have gone through the self-study. They had experts come in to evaluate their school. I think that's high on the list. Number two, it's a really small world, and there's a way to connect with people at all schools. A friend of a friend of a friend knows somebody at that school. Use your network. Find out about the school. Ask the questions. See what you can find out from in that perspective. But at the same time, please don't be scared to ask the really hard questions to the head of school that you're interviewing with. They should be ready for those questions. They need to hear, what are your concerns? What are your worries? Do not hesitate to ask tough questions. So many times people go into interviews and they're trying to sell themselves. I want to come work for you and this is where I want to be. And they might not ask those tough questions. And I want to say, please do, because you want to find out everything you can about that school, that community, that country, before you actually land there.
I want to add a little bit as we look at these trends and we're going forward and more of these, and I'm not going to call them out in a negative way, but for-profit schools are coming in and they're giving a shot, and the market should, if they're not good at what they're doing and they're not able to hire certified teachers, then these schools should struggle and maybe not make it. So I'm sure that's probably one of the big themes going on. Who's going to come out of all this, especially in some of the major cities that just have multiple schools competing with each other, right?
You bring up a really good point. And there are two different parts that I can go into here. Number one, yes, you are finding that there are more people moving into the educational field for business reasons. They're not for profits, but they are there. But they're exemplary schools. There are some great schools out there, even if they are being run by an entity or by a group. So let's be fair. But you are completely right, David, that if the school is not doing well, it will be proven over time. But the other thing that's really interesting is school communities are changing too. So you're finding more children from local communities coming to these international schools who then want to go off to universities in a wide variety of places around the world. The school I first landed in years and years ago, I think looks very different today. That while there were still some great local kids, I think you're going to find that there's more of a local community aspect, which works with the diversity, equity, inclusion, and then more local teachers, and then teachers from other countries as well. So we're living in such interesting times right now, David. It's fascinating to watch what's going on. I don't have a true answer on this one, but I will say there are more schools being opened for-profit entities. And as people looking for jobs, you want to know where you're going. So again, do your homework. Find out as much as you can about them. So it's a great community, but it is changing for sure.
Right. A lot of schools are kind of switching to having more locals than internationals and still calling themselves an international school. So there's quite a spectrum of schools out there.
True.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about curriculum. What new approaches to teaching and learning have you seen in international schools lately?
Well, so that's a good one. That's a really interesting question. So many of the American schools stick with the American curriculum and AP and going in that direction. IB is huge in the international school world. And yet there's a lot of work being done in some other ones that are sort of popping up. I don't know if you know about CGC, the Common Ground Collaborative being run by
Yeah.
Bartlett. So there's, again, times of change. And then I think some schools are having to look at the sort of the local curriculum as well, maybe bringing that in. And now that's not 100% sure on my part, but I will say the American curriculum, AP is out there. The American curriculum is going strong. The IB is going strong. You have a huge network of British schools, so they're in place. So it's a wide variety. But again, the concept here is the families that bring their children to these schools want them to go off to universities in a wide variety of, other countries.
Actually, from my side, my perspective, it was really fun to interview Mel and Cole, who are new teachers in Abu Dhabi. Well, this is their second year now, but we interviewed them last year when they were brand new. And they searched intentionally for a school that had the Alberta curriculum. I was like, that exists out there? Wow, that's crazy. So, yeah, I think it's much more of a thing now that there's these various curricula are seeping out into the world, whether it's the people in Alberta saying, we got to spread the Alberta curriculum, or whether it's international schools saying, hey, this is kind of a cool curriculum, let's adopt it. I don't know which it is, but it's just fun to see, the world being flat and all that.
Well said. You're exactly right. The world being flat. Again, watch as it goes forward.
So let's shift a little bit back to the leadership role of the work that you do. What are some trends regarding school management and leadership structures that you're seeing?
Well, that's a really interesting one. A wide variety of things. The leadership teams, there's structures changing within schools. And let me give you an example. This past week, we had somebody come in to talk a lot about coaching and educational coaching and learning coaching. So the structures and the concepts are changing and bringing other people in. I think leadership is looking at how do we make this work best. And again, I'm going to go back to one of your earlier comments, David, that's the hybrid concept. And so that word, I think, is going to be a key word moving forward. But the school management, I think, is really looking at how do they make sure that it's all being done together. I think the hierarchy, the silos are kind of going by the wayside, and people are really breaking down the models and working with different management teams and styles within the schools. So again, it's a moving piece, and I think you're going to see changes in that as we go forward. And as for student management, there's some really good work being done out there to really bring in the student voices. The one thing I really like is what we're seeing in the leadership capacity is they're bringing students into leadership meetings and management teams. I know that student voices has been terminology that's used quite often in the work that we've been doing. Where's the student voice? Where's the student advocacy? So that's a really interesting piece going on.
Wow, you just gave me an interesting idea. I'm sure someone else has thought of it, but are there students on the board?
I think some schools do have that. I believe, and I can't name one right now, but I will say, okay, so this past year, we worked with Western Academy of Beijing for an event that they called Future of Education Now and Next. And really, it was we did it online. We had to do it online, but it was an online event, but the students ran it. So we had all of our leaders coming in, and the sessions were run by the students. So we're seeing some really great things happen out there.
Wow.
As for the board piece, Audrey, I think I've heard that, but I can't give you a name to back that up.
Well, the Western Academy of Beijing has always been pretty cutting edge, so that's good to hear. So we know that you mentioned wellness, well-being as a trend. We do want to cover that, but we're going to leave it for our second interview with you because we probably want to go into a bit of depth there. But as life coaches, David and I are always very interested in that topic. But let's talk a little bit about how educators make connections and grow their network. And you did specifically mention that. Do you have tips for people who are looking to move into leadership positions for how they can grow that network? And, one thing that I've learned about as I pivot my career is that it's actually considered now okay. You talked about the friend of a friend of a friend. It's considered okay practice now to go through LinkedIn, for example, and connect with a school or a leader by saying, we have XYZ in common. So maybe you can comment a little on growing your network.
Okay. I wrote that down, network. That's a really powerful word. And so let's go for the recruiting aspect. You are completely right. Use LinkedIn, use social media. There are some great Facebook pages, Instagram pages out there where people are coming together to chat, to see what's going on. So networking is so important. So much of it is not what you know, it's who you know, as the old expression goes. But really, networking is so important. And you asked me, how do people network to get into leadership positions? But one of the things I'm going to say is if you're already in the international school world, I'm going to highly recommend that you go to your regional events. Your regional events, the TRI events, the IRCOS events, the NISA events, the CISA events, the MISA, ASA in Africa, IRCOS, and ECIS are all entities you definitely want to use. Now, the one thing that was really interesting about all of those entities is they're all doing online events as well. I know Ed Green at IRCOS had an online event this past weekend. And so what a great way to be able to stay at home, go to an online event about a topic, but there you're meeting people, you're connecting with people. So use, again, there's the technology piece and how that's changing, but create your networks, build your network, don't be shy and get out there. But again, go to the face-to-face events. There's a TRI event coming up in Bogota, Colombia, coming up soon. If anybody's going to be at the TRI event, come find me, please. I will be there. And then IRCOS and NISA are going to be in Bangkok in October. Again, come find me if you're there. I'd love to meet you if you've listened to this. But use those events, come together, create your networks, and then go to the recruiting events. Even if the recruiting event is not a successful one, please use that as a network one. I remember when I was running the recruiting event and I would have people come up to me and they'd say, well, I've already signed up for an interview with the 2 schools I want. I've got nothing else to do. I was like, oh, yes, you do. I was like, you have 50 other people here that you need to go meet because that person that's sitting in this school over here could be in your dream school 3 years from now. Network, network, network. Do not hesitate to go up and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I just want to chat with you. Timing is important, especially when you're at a recruiting event, because that leader might be really stressed on finding that IB teacher, by the way, David, because I think your son will be very successful. But once they've gotten over that work, we're such a transient community. And again, use those times when you're at the event, use them well. Go to the social event. And please remember, the social event is a working event. You do not want to make that a true social event and have the time of your life because that could come back to haunt you. But you want to make sure it's a working event, but you want to use every opportunity to include chatting with that stranger in the elevator. Now, we all have been taught, don't talk to strangers. And yet, do you know how many jobs were landed because, oh, yeah, I'm standing in an elevator and I just met the head of this school and we hit it off. And he said, come, meet me in the lobby in 2 hours, and off I go. It's so important to learn how to network and then to actually do it.
Right. And even thinking about perhaps it would be a good idea for, especially if you want to move into a leadership position, to offer to present at some of these conferences.
Yes.
So I think that would really up your credibility and really give you lots of exposure, and hopefully, yeah, people will reach out to you and say, hey, actually. And then the other thing I want to comment on is even back in the day, pre-internet, pre-huge technological pieces, I know that heads of school and HR people would keep your name on file if they were interested in you, even if they didn't have a position for you that year. And so I would say that that's a forward thinking way as well. Just make those connections, even if they don't have that position, especially if it's a school you're really interested in, because you never know. They may get back to you a few months down the road and say, hey, we had a surprise resignation or what have you. So I think there's that too.
You couldn't have said it any better, Audrey. That's exactly right. And that aspect of, I know from my own personal experience, I landed one of my dream jobs in June. Now, I'm not going to mention which school, where it was. I made the connection back in February. Nothing was there for me. I walked away, and I literally was walking out of my apartment when my phone rang. And I remember thinking, do I answer that or do I not answer that? And it was my dream job calling me from another city where I wanted to go. So I agree with you completely on that one. And the other piece I'm going to back you up on is the aspect of, again, networking. They might not have anything for you this year. They might have something for you next year. They could very well have something for you 2 or 3 years down the road. Open those doors. It is not a here and now, one and done sort of scenario. It is, you got to look at the long game.
Yeah, absolutely.
This reminds me of Jeff Udick and Kim Cafino, many, many years ago, they really kind of set the model for being international educators with expertise, mainly in technology. And Kim would go into coaching, and Jeff too, and with their coattail efforts. But they began to brand themselves and say to the world, the international world, here is what I can do for your school. Might I come in and do some consultation and things like that? And I know, especially for Jeff was able to move from one school to another and work part-time in that school and then go out and do his consulting work. And the school was happy because it made their school look good. And I think Kim did something very similar. And since then, one of the biggest things I've noticed is so many teachers are taking that expertise, branding themselves, and finding ways, just like Audrey's saying, go to these conferences. And now more than ever, with many of them being virtual, you could do it from your home, or if you're, Air Coast, or if you're going to Hong Kong for a PD session. That's another way to start moving into leadership as well. I am here in Idaho with one of my sons who's in sales, and he's constantly reminding me of the business aspect of selling yourself. And I think for maybe folks our age, our generation, we never thought of that. We're just teachers. We're going to do the right thing for children. But I think much more young people coming up into the world of social networking are finding ways to get the word out. But the other flip side of that is also to seek to understand, find other people to learn from. Don't make it all about yourself. Make it about how can I contribute, but also how can I learn by connecting to other people. And between all that effort, doors are going to open for me in my career.
You make me laugh, David. You heard me mention coaching a little while ago. It was Kim Cafino who was with us. She did an incredible job. So you talk about the change in leadership and what's going on. It was actually Kim, and kudos to you for bringing her name up. I was so impressed with her talk this past week. But you also brought up two other pieces there, and one of them was selling themselves. And I get you on that one. I think there's more confidence and they have a better understanding on how they need to do that. And again, networking. But you know what else you just sort of planted a seed I hadn't touched on was you said something about part-time. And what we're also seeing, and this kind of goes back to, again, smaller schools, out of the way places, we think that with the evolution of technology and Zoom, we think that schools might actually also start looking at, like your son is an IB physics teacher, being hired here to do IB physics online and being hired there to pick up jobs and go back to the hybrid model is what I'm trying to explain here. But we are seeing that if you're a small school, maybe in Latin America, and you can't really afford to bring in this one specialized teacher, we really think that technology is changing how things are going to be done, and that these teachers in very high needs areas are going to be able to find their jobs and do it in sitting from home, but doing it in a wide variety of places. Watch that space. That's just a guess, but I do think that that's going to come about.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, like 25 years ago, there was a virtual school provider. I can't remember if it was the electronic school or the digitalschool.com, but they would provide like that French teacher, like French 4. There are 3 kids in this school, wherever you are internationally. And that was the beginning of the whole idea of virtual schools. And then there have been the growth of a lot of companies that do that since. And boy, you're just nailing what my son, his name is Maxwell. Max was coming up with the idea of, he comes overseas, teaches a certain number of years. He loves to tutor. And so he was thinking when he moves to his next school down the road, that he'll have a tutoring base, that wherever he goes in the world, he'll still be able to tutor children from that school where he's working at. But you're going to the next level, the idea that a school that maybe, again, has 3 kids for French 4, and then someone who works in an international school someplace else can be their teacher. That is fabulous, and that is really creative thinking. I appreciate that.
It's going to be interesting to watch to see how that all comes about. But you're talking about sort of the online entities. Look at Global Online Academy. Michael Nakbar is doing some incredible things with his entity and moving forward. Again, let's go back to where we kind of started. Technology is changing how we do everything: recruiting, teaching, management. So it's fascinating. We live in interesting times.
We do. All right, well, let's start wrapping things up. And with the knowledge to our listeners, we're going to have a whole nother talk with Laura. So be ready for that as well. So is there anything else you would like to share? And then how can people follow you? Back to the networking. How can people connect to you?
Oh, thank you. They connect with me on LinkedIn. And I would love it if people want to reach out and connect with me. And I'll share your podcast via LinkedIn, and the AAIE as well has LinkedIn and has a variety of social media sites. This has been a fun conversation for me because it's near and dear to my heart. This has been my life for a long, long time. And going back to my very first comments, it's one of the best kept secrets out there. It is just a great lifestyle. It's a great community. Landing in a foreign community can be really scary and overwhelming. And yet every school I've been part of and every school I've worked with works hard to bring everybody in. I feel very lucky to be part of this group. And I just want to encourage everybody to consider it and to keep going in this direction because there is a need. And these schools are continuing to do some great work, and we need great
I
teachers
love
to
that.
be
And
part of it.
we actually are looking at doing some shows on why do you do this? And despite some setbacks and challenges, why do you keep doing it? And that's a comment that you had made earlier. So I love it.
I'm laughing. I'm sure the three of us could come up with some great
Exactly.
stories about it. Really? You went through that? And why do you keep doing it? And yet I
Exactly.
wouldn't change a
Well,
thing.
thank you again so much for taking the time. I know you're really busy and always jumping from one meeting to the next. And so it's just wonderful to speak to you and your whole organization, the Association for the Advancement of International Education, just speaks to our mission in so many ways. So we really, really appreciate your insights and your comments. And we're just as excited to be part of this community as you are. So thank you again, Laura.
Well, now my thanks to you too. It's my honor to be here with you, David and Audrey. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Cheers, Laura. Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David,
inviting you to travel,
teach,
and connect with us.